The vast emptiness of space held many secrets, but none quite like the one the alien archaeological vessel Seeker stumbled upon that day. Floating silently in the darkness between stars, a massive ship drifted like a forgotten memory. "What an ugly thing," muttered Chief Explorer Dan, his four eyes blinking in sequence as he studied the preliminary scans. The vessel before them was unlike anything in their database, all hard angles and thick armor, with none of the elegant curves that marked modern spaceship design. Tom Roberts stood quietly at his station, the only human aboard the Seeker. Being the resident expert on primitive species, as his alien colleagues often said, he was usually ignored during major discoveries. But something about this ship made his heart race. "Look at this waste of materials," laughed First Engineer Pike, waving one of his tentacles at the display. "They used actual metal plating instead of energy shields. How did they even get this thing into space?" Tom leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the readings. The ship was huge, nearly 2 kilometers long, with battle scars etched deep into its hull. But what caught his attention were the markings still visible on its bow. "Sir," Tom spoke up, his voice steady despite his excitement, "I believe we should bring this vessel in for closer study." Dan turned all four eyes toward him, an expression Tom had learned to recognize as amusement crossing his features. "The human thinks this relic is worth our time. Very well. It might make an interesting addition to our museum of failed spacefaring attempts." The recovery operation took nearly 6 hours. The Seeker's tractor beams struggled with the massive weight of the ancient vessel, something that brought another round of laughter from the alien crew. "Even dead, it fights against modern technology," one of them joked. But Tom wasn't laughing. He recognized things the others missed. The way the hull was layered, the unusual configuration of what they assumed were primitive engines, the strange readings coming from what should have been a long-dead power core. As they towed the ship toward Deep Space Station 88, the closest research facility, Tom spent hours in the observation room. He couldn't shake the feeling that they'd found something far more significant than a simple derelict. The humans built their ships like fortresses, lead researcher Mac commented, floating next to Tom on her anti-gravity disk. Such a waste of resources. No wonder they never expanded far beyond their home system. Tom bit his tongue. He knew better than to argue. The galaxy's current powers had a very specific view of humanity's place in the cosmic hierarchy, somewhere between quaint primitives and interesting study subjects. The station grew larger in their viewport, its crystalline spires reaching out into space like frozen lightning. Tom watched as traffic control directed them to the largest archaeological bay, normally reserved for significant discoveries. "We'll call it the Relic," Dan announced, clearly proud of himself for coming up with such a clever name. A perfect example of how not to build a spaceship. The massive bay doors opened, swallowing both their ship and their find. As atmospheric shields engaged and gravity normalized, Tom got his first real look at the vessel they'd recovered. His breath caught in his throat. There, beneath centuries of space dust and impact scars, he could make out the ship's name. The aliens couldn't read the old Earth military font, but Tom could. His grandfather had served in humanity's first space fleet, and he'd grown up hearing stories about ships like this. "Sir," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I believe I can identify this vessel." "Oh." Dan turned to him with what passed for a condescending smile among his species. "Do tell us what ancient wisdom you've discovered about this floating scrap heap." Tom pointed to the markings. "Those aren't just decorations, sir. That's the ship's name and designation." He paused, remembering all the bedtime stories his grandfather had told him. "If I'm reading this correctly, we've just found the HS Thunderchild." The aliens laughed, the sound echoing through the observation deck. But Tom wasn't listening anymore. He knew what they'd really found. One of the most advanced warships humanity had ever built, thought lost during the first expansion. And something about it was still alive, still humming with power that his alien colleagues were too proud to notice. The real question was, What would happen when it fully woke up? The research bay buzzed with activity as alien scientists swarmed around the ancient warship. Tools whirred and scanners hummed. But Tom Roberts kept to himself, quietly making his own observations from a corner workstation. "These weapon mounts are so basic," called out one researcher, hanging upside down on an anti-gravity platform. "They couldn't even manage simple plasma arrays." Tom glanced up from his work, watching as they completely missed the true nature of what they were examining. What they thought were primitive gun ports were actually cooling vents for something far more sophisticated. He pulled up the old stories on his personal tablet, carefully hidden from view. His grandfather's journals spoke of ships like the Thunderchild, vessels that had changed the course of human history. But the details were always clouded in mystery, classified even centuries later. "Roberts," Chief Explorer Dan floated over. "Your primitive expertise is required. These markings near the engine section. Translate them for us." Tom walked over, his magnetic boots clicking against the deck. The markings were warning signs, but not the kind his colleagues assumed. "Just maintenance access warnings," he lied smoothly. In truth, they were radiation warnings for the ship's main power core, something that shouldn't still be active after all these years. Late that night, when most of the research team had retired, Tom snuck back to the bay. The massive ship loomed in the darkness, its hull reflecting the dim emergency lighting. He placed his hand against the cool metal, feeling the subtle vibration that none of the aliens had noticed. "You're still alive, aren't you?" he whispered. As if in response, a barely perceptible hum rippled through the hull. Tom pulled out his scanner, not the standard issue one, but an old device passed down through his family. Its readings confirmed what he'd suspected: power signatures that shouldn't exist in a dead ship. "What are you doing here at this hour?" Tom spun around to find lead researcher May hovering nearby. He quickly pocketed his scanner. "Just fascinated by the construction methods," he said. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about ships like this." May's tentacles rippled in what Tom recognized as amusement. "Ah yes, your ancestor worship. How quaint. But surely you realize this vessel represents your species' technological limitations." Tom nodded politely, but his mind was racing. He'd found something in the ship's database, fragments of information about experimental technology that combined artificial gravity, quantum mechanics, and controlled fusion in ways that modern science claimed were impossible. The next day, while the team focused on cataloging the primitive weapon systems, Tom quietly accessed a maintenance hatch they'd overlooked. Inside, he found what he'd been searching for: a secondary control node, still drawing power from somewhere deep within the ship. His grandfather's journals hadn't been specific, but they'd mentioned something called Project Thunderstorm. The pieces were starting to fit together. The Thunderchild wasn't just a warship. It was a prototype, a test bed for technology so advanced it had been disguised as something primitive. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the station. Tom quickly sealed the hatch and hurried back to the main bay. The ship's power readings had spiked, causing concern among the research team. "Just residual energy discharge," one scientist declared confidently. "These old power cells sometimes release their last bit of charge before dying completely." But Tom knew better. The Thunderchild wasn't dying. It was waking up. Every system they'd dismissed as primitive was actually part of an elaborate disguise. The real technology lay hidden beneath, waiting for someone who knew what to look for. As the team argued about the power spike, Tom's old scanner picked up something new. A signal, weak but clear, pulsing from the ship's AI core. It was a recognition code, matching patterns described in his grandfather's journals. The Thunderchild knew it had been found. More importantly, it had recognized Tom as human. Now he just needed time. Time to understand its systems, time to prepare for what he knew would come next. Because ships like the Thunderchild weren't built for peaceful exploration. They were built for war. And somewhere in the darkness of space, war was coming to find them. Tom glanced at the aliens still arguing about power readings and almost felt sorry for them. They had no idea what they'd actually found, or what it was about to show them. The first warning came as a ripple through space itself. Deep Space Station 88's long-range sensors detected multiple ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel, their energy signatures unfamiliar and hostile. Battle stations. The command echoed through the station's corridors. Tom Roberts looked up from his work in the research bay, his heart pounding as red emergency lights began flashing. Through the massive observation windows, he watched as sleek, predatory vessels emerged from the darkness. Their design was unlike anything he'd seen before, black ships that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Unknown fleet approaching," announced the station's eye. 37 warships detected. They are not responding to hails. Chief Explorer Dan rushed into the bay, all four eyes wide with panic. The raiders. They found us. His usual composure had vanished. They're not supposed to be in this sector. Tom had heard of the raiders, a mysterious force that appeared from nowhere, stripped stations and colonies bare, and vanished back into deep space. No one knew who they were or where they came from. The station's shields flared to life, a crystalline barrier of energy forming around the massive structure. Modern defensive technology at its finest, and Tom had a sinking feeling it wouldn't be enough. His suspicions were confirmed moments later when the first shots were fired. The raiders' weapons weren't just powerful. They seemed to phase through the shields as if they weren't even there. Impossible. First Engineer Pike's tentacles writhed in distress as he studied the readings. They're using some kind of quantum-phased energy we've never seen before. But Tom had seen it before, in his grandfather's journals. The same technology that powered the Thunderchild's weapons. He looked at the ancient warship, still sitting quietly in the research bay, and made his decision. "Everyone out," he ordered, surprising himself with the authority in his voice. "Clear the bay immediately." "What are you talking about?" Dan demanded. "This is no time for—" The station rocked with another hit, cutting him off. Emergency force fields flickered as hull breaches began to appear. "Trust me," Tom said quietly. "This bay is about to become a combat zone. Get everyone to safety." Something in his tone must have convinced them. As the research team evacuated, Tom ran to the Thunderchild's main access hatch. His hand shook as he input the codes he'd discovered in the ship's secondary control node. The station's defenses were failing. Through the windows, he could see the raider fleet moving into attack formation. Their black ships looked like a swarm of deadly insects against the star-filled backdrop. "Station shields at 12%, the AI announced calmly. "Hull breaches on levels 3 through 7. Evacuation protocols initiated." Tom reached the ship's bridge, not the simple control room the aliens had found, but the real one, hidden behind layers of false walls and security systems. As he sat in the command chair, displays sprang to life around him. "Come on," he whispered, fingers dancing across the ancient controls. "Wake up. They need you. We need you." Deep within the Thunderchild, something stirred. Power began flowing through systems that had lain dormant for centuries. The ship's true nature began to reveal itself as armor plates shifted and weapons emerged from hidden compartments. Through the bay windows, Tom could see the raiders launching boarding pods. They would breach the station within minutes. The research team's evacuation shuttles were launching, but the raiders were picking them off one by one. "Thunderchild." Tom spoke clearly, remembering the activation phrases from his grandfather's journals. "Authorization code. Stormbreaker. Combat protocols. Engaged." The ship's systems roared to life. What the aliens had dismissed as primitive metal plating began to glow with inner energy. The simple weapon mounts transformed, revealing technology that shouldn't have existed in that era of human history. "Combat Eye online," a deep voice responded. "Threat assessment in progress. Multiple hostile contacts detected." Tom gripped the controls tightly. "Can you fight?" "This vessel was built for war," the AI replied simply. "The real question, Human Officer Roberts, is, are you ready to fight with me?" Outside, the raiders had noticed the power spike from the bay. Their ships began turning toward the station, weapons charging. They had no idea what they were about to face. Tom allowed himself a grim smile. Show them what a real warship can do. The Thunderchild's bridge hummed with power as systems long dormant surged back to life. Holographic displays materialized around Tom, showing tactical data and ship status in crisp, clear detail. "I am James," the ship's AI announced. "Combat Intelligence Matrix, HS Thunderchild, beginning full system restoration." Tom watched in awe as the ship's true form emerged. What had appeared to be solid hull plates split and shifted, revealing weapon systems that made the alien technology look primitive by comparison. "Multiple hostile contacts approaching," James reported. Their weapons technology matches historical records of the Void Raiders, analyzing attack patterns. Through the bridge viewport, Tom could see the Raider ships turning their attention to the awakening warship. Their black hulls seemed to ripple as they moved, like liquid shadow given form. "Station shields critical," announced the station's eye. "Evacuation 43% complete. Estimated survival rate declining." "James," Tom called out, "how long until we're combat ready?" "Main weapons at 62% power and rising. Hull transformation at 84% completion. Estimated time to full combat readiness, 3 minutes." A blast from one of the Raider ships struck near the research bay, sending tremors through the station. The Raiders had noticed the power spike from the Thunderchild and clearly recognized a threat when they saw one. "We don't have 3 minutes," Tom muttered. "What can we do now?" "Secondary weapons online," James responded. "Point defense grid operational. Shall we show them why humanity's ships were feared?" Tom nodded grimly. "Light them up." The Thunderchild's point defense system activated. What the alien researchers had dismissed as primitive projectile weapons turned out to be something far more devastating. Streams of accelerated particles, contained in electromagnetic fields, lashed out at the nearest Raider vessel. The black ship's advanced shields flickered and failed, unable to cope with weapons they'd never encountered before. The Raiders responded with a barrage of their own, their quantum-phased energy weapons striking the Thunderchild's hull. But the ancient warship didn't falter. Its armor, now fully energized, absorbed the attacks like they were nothing more than light rain. "Hull integrity at 97%, James reported calmly. "Their weapons are ineffective against our quantum-locked armor matrix. Main power core now at full capacity." The bridge lighting shifted to combat status as the ship's transformation completed. What had appeared to be a simple warship now bristled with technology centuries ahead of its time. "How?" Tom asked, watching in amazement. "How did we have this level of technology back then?" Project Thunderstorm was humanity's response to threats like the Raiders, James explained while coordinating defensive fire. "When we realized how vulnerable traditional technology was, we developed systems that operated on completely different principles. The primitive appearance was a disguise, hiding our true capabilities from potential enemies." Another Raider ship exploded as the Thunderchild's weapons found their mark. The remaining Raiders began to adjust their formation, finally realizing they weren't dealing with an obsolete relic. "They're targeting the station's reactor," James warned. "If it breaches, the explosion will destroy everything in this sector." Tom studied the tactical display. The evacuation wasn't complete, and the station's defenses were almost gone. They needed to buy more time. "James, can we draw their fire? Make ourselves a more tempting target?" "Affirmative. Initiating combat maneuvers. However, you should be aware that my original pilot interface was designed for a neural link. Manual control will be challenging." Tom gripped the physical controls tighter. "We'll manage. Just tell me what to do." The Thunderchild's engines roared to life, maneuvering thrusters pushing the massive ship clear of the research bay. As they emerged into open space, the Raiders turned to face them, their weapons charging for a concentrated barrage. "Multiple weapons locked on," James reported. "They're committing their full force to our destruction." "Good," Tom said, allowing himself a small smile. That means they're not shooting at the station anymore. Now, let's show them what this old relic can really do. The space around them lit up with weapons fire as humanity's greatest warship engaged in battle for the first time in centuries. The raiders were about to learn a harsh lesson about underestimating primitive technology. The Thunderchild moved with a grace that belied its massive size. Tom watched in amazement as the ship's true weapons emerged from their hiding places, transforming what had looked like simple gun ports into arrays of technology that defied modern understanding. Main power core stable, James announced, initiating primary weapon systems. Deep within the ship, something incredible was happening. What the alien researchers had dismissed as an outdated fusion reactor was actually a contained artificial star, carefully hidden behind layers of shielding and misdirection. Multiple enemy vessels launching fighters, James reported. They appear to be unmanned combat drones. Through the bridge viewport, Tom watched as hundreds of small black shapes poured from the raider ships. They moved like a swarm of angry insects, their weapons charging with the same phase-shifted energy that had torn through the station's shields. Analyzing attack pattern, James said calmly. Activating point defense grid, full spectrum. The space around the Thunderchild lit up as hidden defense turrets emerged from the hull. But instead of traditional energy weapons, they fired streams of what looked like liquid light. Wherever this strange substance touched the raider drones, they simply ceased to exist. "What is that?" Tom asked, watching another wave of drones vanish. "Quantum dissolution field," James explained. "It temporarily removes matter from our dimension. The process is permanent for anything caught in it." The raiders seemed to hesitate, their remaining drones pulling back. Their capital ships began moving into a new formation, weapons charging for what looked like a concentrated attack. "They're preparing to fire their main guns," James warned. "Energy readings are significant." Tom gripped his controls tighter. "Can we take that kind of hit?" "We don't have to." There was something almost like amusement in the eye's voice. "Activating primary offensive systems. Suggest you watch closely, Officer Roberts. Few humans have ever seen this." The front section of the Thunderchild began to transform. Plates shifted and rotated, revealing a massive aperture that seemed to bend light around it. Energy from the artificial star core flowed through newly exposed conduits, making the hull glow with contained power. What the aliens never understood, James explained as the weapon charged, was that humanity didn't build better guns. We found a way to weaponize physics itself. The raiders fired first, their combined beam weapons lancing out across space. But before they could reach the Thunderchild, reality itself seemed to twist. "Initiating gravity lance," James announced. "Target locked." A beam of pure gravitational force erupted from the Thunderchild's bow. It wasn't visible as traditional weapons fire. Instead, it manifested as a distortion in space itself, a ripple that bent light and matter around it. When it reached the raider formation, the effects were devastating. Ships caught in its path were literally torn apart as localized gravity wells formed and collapsed in microseconds. Those that weren't destroyed immediately found themselves being pulled apart by tidal forces that their advanced shields were never designed to handle. "By the stars," Tom whispered, watching 3 raider capital ships break apart under forces they couldn't possibly resist. The remaining raiders scattered, their tight formation breaking as they tried to escape the gravitational weapons effect. But the Thunderchild wasn't finished. "Secondary weapons grid online," James reported. "Multiple target solutions available." What the alien researchers had labeled as backup thrusters turned out to be temporal displacement cannons. Each shot created a microscopic time dilation field, catching raider ships in bubbles where time moved thousands of times slower than normal. "This is impossible," Tom said, watching another raider vessel freeze in space, its weapons fire suspended in mid-launch. "How did we have this technology centuries ago?" Humanity learned early that survival sometimes requires thinking beyond conventional limitations, James replied. "The Thunderchild wasn't built to fight fair. It was built to win." From the station's perspective, it must have looked like something from legend. An ancient warship wielding powers that defied modern science, tearing through a fleet that had previously seemed unstoppable. The raiders were learning a harsh lesson about underestimating primitive technology. But more importantly, they were learning why human warships had once been feared throughout known space. The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned. The Thunderchild had awakened, and it was living up to its name. The battle had reached its peak as the Thunderchild faced the remaining raider vessels. Space itself seemed to warp and twist around the ancient warship as it unleashed weapons that shouldn't have existed. Multiple hostiles regrouping, James reported. They appeared to be adapting their shields to our gravity lance. Tom watched as the surviving raiders formed a new battle line. Their black hulls rippled with energy as they adjusted their defenses, learning from each devastating hit they'd taken. Clever, James commented. They're using their quantum phase technology to try to deflect our gravitational attacks. Adjusting combat strategies. The Thunderchild's artificial star core pulsed with power as the ship brought new weapons to bear. What had looked like simple communication arrays transformed into temporal displacement fields, creating pockets of altered time around the vessel. Incoming fire, James warned. The raiders launched a coordinated attack, their weapons synchronized to punch through the Thunderchild's defenses. But the ancient warship had one more surprise in store. Initiating chronometric dispersion, James announced. Time itself seemed to fragment around the Thunderchild. Each incoming shot struck a different temporal plane, their energy dissipating across multiple moments in time rather than impacting all at once. Station evacuation now at 89%, the station's AI reported. Remaining civilian vessels require cover for escape. Tom nodded grimly. James, can we give them a path out? Affirmative. Deploying space-fold generators. The Thunderchild's hull opened in new places, revealing devices that bent space itself. A corridor of twisted space-time formed, creating a safe route for the evacuation ships to escape through. Raiders attempting to pursue civilian vessels, James reported. Implementing countermeasures. What happened next defied explanation. The Thunderchild released a wave of quantum particles that had been artificially aged to near the end of their existence. When they collided with the Raiders' shields, they underwent simultaneous decay across multiple quantum states. The result was spectacular. 3 Raider ships simply vanished, their matter converted to energy as quantum probability caught up with them all at once. Warning, James announced. Enemy flagship preparing unknown weapons system. The largest Raider vessel had begun to change shape, its black hull flowing like liquid metal. Energy readings from it exceeded anything their sensors could properly measure. They're desperate, Tom realized. They're going to try to take us all out at once. Agreed, James replied. Fortunately, this scenario was anticipated in my original combat protocols. The Thunderchild's artificial star core began to pulse faster, its energy feeding into systems that had remained dormant until now. The ship's hull resonated with power as it prepared its final weapon. What are we doing? Tom asked, watching in awe as reality seemed to blur around them. Creating a localized bubble of altered quantum probability, James explained. In simple terms, we're going to make it impossible for their attack to succeed. The Raider flagship fired, its weapon tearing a hole in space itself. But as the attack approached the Thunderchild, probability itself seemed to rebel against it. Every possible way the attack could fail happened simultaneously. The energy dissipated, the targeting failed, the weapon misfired, all at once, across countless quantum states. Probability cascade successful, James reported. Enemy flagship weapons disabled. Beginning final attack run. The Thunderchild surged forward, its remaining weapons combining into a single devastating barrage. Gravity weapons twisted space, temporal cannons fragmented time, and quantum dissolution fields erased matter from existence. The Raiders, their ultimate weapon neutralized and their fleet in ruins, began to retreat. Their black ships turned away, attempting to escape into faster-than-light travel. Should we pursue? Tom asked, watching them flee. Negative, James replied. Station security is our priority. Additionally, they've learned what they needed to learn. Tom nodded, understanding. The raiders had come expecting an easy target, thinking themselves superior to primitive human technology. They left knowing better. As the last raider ship vanished into FTL, Tom looked back at the station. The evacuation ships were safe, protected by the Thunderchild's space-fold corridor. The station itself was damaged, but intact. Combat operations complete, James announced. All hostile contacts have withdrawn from the sector. The ancient warship had done more than just win a battle. It had reminded the galaxy why human technology, no matter how old or simple it appeared, should never be underestimated. Thunder had rolled across the stars once more, and its echo would be remembered. The aftermath of the battle left Deep Space Station 88 in a state of stunned silence. The Thunderchild floated serenely in space, its true form now fully revealed, no longer the simple relic they had mocked, but a masterpiece of human engineering. Damage assessment complete, James reported as Tom guided the ship back toward the station. All systems functioning within acceptable parameters. Through the bridge viewport, Tom could see the station's repair drones already at work, sealing hull breaches and stabilizing damaged sections. But more interesting were the faces pressed against every observation window, aliens of all species staring at the Thunderchild in disbelief. Chief Explorer Dan was the first to meet them when they docked. His 4 eyes were wide with a mix of fear and awe. Officer Roberts, he said, his usual condescension completely gone. There are questions. I imagine there are, Tom replied with a small smile. But first, is everyone safe? Yes, thanks to you and this. Dan gestured at the ship, struggling to find the right words. This masterpiece of deception. We were such fools. The research bay, once filled with laughing aliens studying what they thought was primitive technology, now buzzed with a different kind of energy. Scientists worked frantically to understand what they had seen, their instruments struggling to make sense of the Thunderchild systems. Lead researcher Mai floated up to Tom, her tentacles moving in patterns he recognized as deep respect. The quantum manipulation alone, she said, it changes everything we thought we knew about physics. How did humans achieve this so long ago? We had motivation, Tom explained, running his hand along the ship's hull. When humanity first reached the stars, we found threats we couldn't match with conventional technology. So we stopped trying to match them and started thinking differently. The station's commander called an emergency meeting of all senior staff. In the main conference room, Tom stood before representatives of a dozen alien species, all wanting to understand what they had witnessed. The Thunderchild wasn't just a warship, he explained. It was a proof of concept. Humanity learned early that looking primitive could be an advantage. While everyone else raced to build bigger energy weapons, we explored the foundations of reality itself. First Engineer Pike, who had once laughed at the ship's primitive design, now led a team studying its artificial star core. The power regulation alone, he muttered, his instruments recording readings he could barely comprehend. It breaks every rule we thought we understood. As days passed, the station transformed. What had been a simple research facility became the center of a new scientific revolution. The Human Military Heritage Museum, once planned as a collection of primitive artifacts, was redesigned to showcase the true genius of human engineering. They want to know if there are more, Tom told James during a quiet moment on the bridge. More ships like you, hidden throughout space. That information remains classified, James replied, but there was amusement in his artificial voice. Let them wonder. Sometimes, the possibility of something is more effective than the thing itself. The station's archives were updated, historical records revised to reflect their new understanding of human technological achievement. Where once they had dismissed Earth's early space fleet as primitive, they now studied every detail, looking for more hidden wonders. Tom found himself appointed as chief curator of the new museum, tasked with sharing humanity's true technological heritage with the galaxy. But he was careful about what he revealed, remembering his grandfather's words about the importance of keeping some secrets. The raiders never returned to that sector of space. Word spread quickly about the ancient human warship that had decimated their fleet, and with it spread a new respect for the species they had once dismissed as technological primitives. "You know what the best part is?" Tom asked James one evening, as they watched alien ships giving the Thunderchild a respectfully wide berth as they passed. "What's that, Officer Roberts? They still haven't figured out that you're only showing them a fraction of what you can do." The ship's AI made a sound that might have been a chuckle. "Some secrets are best kept hidden," James replied, "at least until they're needed." Deep Space Station 88 became known throughout the galaxy as the place where perceptions changed, where the true nature of human ingenuity was finally understood. And at its heart, the Thunderchild stood as a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and that true power often hid behind the simplest facades. The Relic had roared to life, and the galaxy would never be the same.